Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. 世界の皆さん、おはようございます。こんにちは、こんばんは。My name is Jerry. I'm with the PR department at the office of the President at Ritsumeikan Asia Pacific University, located on the island of Kyushu in Japan. こちらはジェリー・ペチャックと申します。立命館アジア太平洋大学学長室広報チームのコミュニケーションズの担当です。For today's webinar, the presentation will be in English and in Japanese. Interpretation will be provided. In order to set your language, please refer to, at the bottom of your screen, the interpretation button. 今日のウェビナーは、日本語と英語同時通訳が入っていますので、この方法で言語設定をお願いします。Choose your language, English or Japanese, and you will be able to listen to the interpretation. 日本語または英語を選択してから通訳が聞こえます。Okay, with that, I would like to take care of some administrative notes for today's webinar. Today's webinar is brought to you by the Ritsumeikan Asia Pacific University, University of Pretoria, and JICA. We will be taking questions for a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. The questions will be taken through the Q&A feature of Zoom. If you look at the bottom of your window, you will see a Q&A button. You can click there, it will open a window. You can enter your questions in English or Japanese. And we will accept questions from there during the Q&A portion. When you look in the Q&A window, if there is a question that you would like to hear the answer to, you can upvote or give a thumbs up to that question. That will move the question towards the top, and those will be the ones we choose from first. So today's webinar, we will have President Degucci from Ritsumeikan Asia Pacific University will speak for about 25 minutes. Dr. Nshimbi from University of Pretoria will also speak for about 25 minutes, and after that we will have the Q&A session. So for now, I would like to hand this over to Dr. Nshimbi for his introduction. Dr. Nishimi, please.
Thank you very much, Keith. Good day to everyone. Good morning here from Pretoria. On behalf of the Vice Chancellor and Principal of the University of Pretoria, the Dean of Humanities, Professor Reddy, the Head of Department for Political Sciences, Professor Skuman, and the Director for the Center of Japanese Studies, Professor Standa. My name is Chris Nshimbi, and I would like to welcome you to this webinar today. And I do hope that you are going to have a good time and that we're going to have meaningful engagement and interaction. And more so looking forward to more networking and collaboration after the webinar. Without taking much of your time, I would like to hand over to the Vice Chancellor and Principal of the University of Pretoria, Professor Kupe, to give an opening statement. Professor Kupe, over to you.
Good morning. Thank you, Dr. Nshimbi. A very good morning and a very good afternoon to our Japanese colleagues, and morning, afternoon, or evening elsewhere in the world. Dear Professor Degucci, dear Dr. Nshimbi, and distinguished guests, all protocol observed, thank you for the opportunity to do the welcoming speech at this remarkable event, where three important entities decided to collaborate to make this webinar possible. The University of Pretoria's relationship with Retsumeikan Asia Pacific University goes back to 3 November 2003, when these two universities signed a memorandum of understanding. The University of Pretoria is proud to have Retsumeikan Asia Pacific University as a partner, since we know that it is one of the leading international universities in Japan. And I'm glad to see that this memorandum of understanding is still active and bearing fruit. At the University of Pretoria, partnerships and collaborations are at the heart and soul of the university, especially with leading international partners. And I'm glad that we have leading international partners in Japan. As a matter of fact, besides Professor Degucci, two of the other role players at this webinar also have a relationship with Retsumeikan Asia Pacific University. Firstly, both Dr. Nshimbi, who's a director of the University of Pretoria Center for the Study of Governance Innovation, and Mr. Martin Mangani, who is the JICA Program Officer at the Center for Japanese Studies at the University of Pretoria, studied and are alumni of Retsumeikan Asia Pacific University. The University of Pretoria also has a long-standing relationship with the Japan International Cooperation Agency, otherwise known as JICA, through their support of the Center for Japanese Studies. In addition, it needs to be mentioned that this year, the Center for Japanese Studies is celebrating its 10th year anniversary. I need also to add here that last year I attended TCAD 7 in Yokohama, Japan, through an invitation by JICA. I then spent a lot of time in Japan, both in Tokyo and in Yokohama, discussing with several other universities in Japan, including the University of Tokyo. One should also see this webinar in a broader context of collaboration between South Africa and Japan. The South Africa-Japan University Forum, SAJU, was established in 2007 to facilitate collaboration between the higher education institutions of these two countries towards achievement of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, popularly known as the SDGs. This webinar, therefore, is serving to support SAJU's objective to contribute towards addressing global challenges in a meaningful way. We are currently very much aware of the COVID-19 challenge, but we should not forget other challenges such as urbanization, regional vitalization, and demographics, aspects that will receive attention today, and that are related to several of the SDGs that they speak to bigger issues such as development, equality, sustainable migration, and climate change issues. We are therefore looking forward to Professor Degucci's and Dr. Nshimbi's views on regional revitalization. Our moderator, Dr. Nshimbi's research also focuses on migration, borders, and regional integration. With these two specialists in our midst, I'm therefore sure that we're going to have a very interesting webinar and a lively discussion afterwards. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm also impressed with the resilience of academics who worked very hard in the past year to ensure that our academic projects do not suffer from the challenges that the COVID-19 posed to us. Our staff were very inventive to ensure not only good teaching continues, but also that academic debates flourish in such platforms and using webinars. I therefore want to congratulate the Center for Japanese Studies, the Retsumeikan Asia Pacific University, who organized this event, with the support of JICA, for promoting international collaboration in the service of our mutual interest in sharing knowledge and expertise with a view to contribute to the achievement of the SDGs. May I finally again welcome each one who has logged in to listen to our speakers. may you find this morning in South Africa, of course, afternoon in Japan, and it could be evening or either of the two from people who have joined elsewhere in the world. And with this now, I hand over to our moderator, Dr. Nshimbi. I will not be able to stay for the whole session because as Vice Chancellor, you are called to a number of events. So I have 3 other events, but I'll be able to listen to Dr. Degucci as well, to listen to Dr. Degucci and perhaps a little more of what happens this afternoon before I have to go to a physical event. But thank you very much. You are welcome. Just a robust intellectual debate and presentations. Over to you, Dr. Nshimbi.
Thank you very much, Professor Kupe, for those welcoming remarks and also for blessing this meeting. Without much ado or further ado, I'll hand over back to Keith so that he can introduce President Degucci to give his presentation. Keith, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nishimbi. So I will, of course, now we will introduce President Deguchi.
So good morning, everybody. And also good evening, everybody. Can everybody hear me? So it seems that you can hear me now. So today we will be doing this event with our partner, University of Pretoria, and also JICA's South Africa office. And I'm very happy that we were able to organize this event with these important partners. I would like to thank Dr. Nshimbi from University of Pretoria, and also Martin from JICA. Both of them are alumni of APU. So I'm very happy to be working with them here today. I have only been to Pretoria once. But I just remember how bright the sun was in South Africa, and it makes me feel very nostalgic. Today, I have about 25 minutes to give my speech to you. So I did create a PowerPoint for this, but I will not be using that. But I'll be talking about 3 major points. The first point I would like to discuss is the demographics. The second point is about the Japanese economy. And the third point I will cover will be about the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'll be giving you my views on these 3 major issues. There is a scholar in France named Emmanuel Todd, and I was reading a paper of his about family relationships, and so from there I was able to learn about, he raised issues of Japan as being essentially the only issue Japan faces is the depopulation and the dwindling birth rate. And looking at the most recent birth rate, it's 1.36. So Dr. Todd said that this extremely low rate of birth rate is rooted in the issues of discrimination against women. So regarding this point, I agree 100% with Dr. Emmanuel Todd. I believe that is the major root cause of the low birth rate in Japan. In post-war Japan, we are not at the level of today's China, but for 30 to 40 years, we recorded annual growth of 7%. Most of this is due to the increase of the population during that time. The biggest issue in Japan, I believe, is the demographic issue. As an industrialized country, some people may feel that population is going to naturally decline. But what about France? It has a birth rate of almost 2.0 and has been able to maintain that, so that explanation does not hold. The birth rate can be significantly altered due to policies. That's my personal belief. And the Japanese government is aiming to bring the birth rate up to 1.8. However, its policies are not effectively working. This is why this birth rate remains relatively stagnant. As for discrimination, gender discrimination, the OECD has released the Gender Gap Index. Out of 153 countries, Japan ranks at a very low 121. As these figures show, the biggest issue in Japan is putting effective policies in place that will help to boost the birth rate. With a very low rate like 1.36, if that continues, what's going to happen to Japan? Many scholars have pointed out that if the population continues to decline, we're going to run into some major issues in the future. In the US, where even the population is increasing, we're seeing this issue of the Rust Belt, and this is a similar issue in Japan, but our birth rate is falling. Right now in Tokyo metropolitan area in Japan, the greater Tokyo area has a population of over 40 million people. That makes it the biggest mega city in the world. As the population declines, this means more people are going to head to Tokyo. The regional areas will lose population and decline. We have a compact city called Tokyo in Japan, and it is taking away the population from the outlying areas, and this is not unusual. Japan is trying to revitalize its outlying regions. I am also a member of the Regional Rebuilding Council of the Japanese national government to help these declining regional regions. I believe the best thing we can do is eliminate gender discrimination, and by doing that, to increase the population. And I personally think that is the only way forward to address this issue. APU is in Japan where the population is declining. It's in a regional area of Japan. So we are existing amid this larger trend of decline. APU wants to strengthen its linkages with the government agencies, private sector, and other academic institutions. Private institutions exist to create profit. So when you look at local governments, if they would like to provide universal service to all public services to all of their citizens, that's their biggest aim. So what the private sector and the public sector are trying to do is different. So to put quite simply, it's quite difficult to make linkages between the private sector and the public sector. But universities do not exist to create profit. So for local governments to provide universal service, the university, that's not its job. So it can act as a third party to link the private and the public sectors. So by acting as a bridge between these two sectors, universities can help foster collaboration and make it easier. APU wants to work as this liaison between the public and the private sectors and become a hub for this collaboration. And I believe if we do this, we can make the greater Kyushu region where we're located even better and make it more energized. Universities in these outlying areas should be trying to help out their communities that are in decline. This is why I think universities can play a central role as a hub for these linkages and collaboration between the public and private sectors. And this is why APU is striving to contribute to revitalizing the region in which it is located. And I believe that's one of our important missions. Secondly, talking about the Japanese economy, in the last 30 years, the level of Japanese economy in the world, very simply put, in terms of GDP, and when you look at the GDP by PPP, purchasing power parity, that figure has fallen from 9% down to 4%. So that's a decline of over 50%. If you look at the IMD based in Switzerland, and they release figures on international competitivity. And over the last 30 years, Japan fell from number 1 all the way down to number 30. "30 years ago, the biggest company in the world, if you look at the top 20 of those companies, 14 of them were Japanese companies. Now, no Japanese companies are in the top 20. So looking at this data, what this means is that the economy of Japan in recent years has not been functioning properly. You can't explain this just by the issue of depopulation. Why is that? I think there are 2 points that we can raise. First, is the people who are championing deflation, and they think that that's the biggest issue. The Bank of Japan, our central bank, has said it will continue doing quantitative easing until the growth rate reaches 2%. But no matter how much quantitative easing our central bank has done, we're still in a deflationary spiral. Recently, if you look at MMT theory that was created in the United States, for the price index to reach 2%, the policy here is to just keep using financial instruments to achieve that goal. And this is what I think, and I think there are people who think this is the reason why the economy is not functioning well in Japan. There is another view on this, however. The reason that the economy has stagnated is because of BAT and these and the big four tech companies, these large new companies and unicorn companies. These are things that Japan has not been able to create, and because of that, it has not been able to keep deflation in check. That this is the result of not creating these new industries. So that's the other view of this issue. In Japan, so there are these two competing ideas as to why the economy has been stagnating. Personally, I think it's the second reason, that Japan has not been able to create new industries. When new industries are created, according to some scholars, what you need to create these unicorn type companies is diversity. So in terms of diversity, I touched on the issue of the status of women in society. Who is supporting companies in Japan? It's still very much the men in their 50s and 60s, almost exclusively. So there's a very small percentage of women in the workforce. There's an even smaller percentage of non-Japanese in the workforce. So when you look at these big four tech companies or unicorns, you see a very diverse workforce. So if you mix people of different backgrounds together, companies can become stronger. Sports teams can become stronger. So this is why Japan's inability to promote diversity has led to its inability to create unicorn companies and new industries. Now, regarding education, looking at the percentage of people going to higher education, and then looking at the population of 18 to 22-year-olds, you can see how many people are studying in higher education. So you get this rate of higher education. And because we have this low rank of 120 in the gender gap index, and Japan is also famous for working very long hours. So once people enter the workforce or the real world, they lose the chance to engage in continuous learning. This is why we see a much lower rate of people advancing to higher education, such as graduate school programs. So once you enter the workforce at this young age, many people don't have time to study. They don't have the opportunity to go to graduate school. So this is why we remain having a very low percentage of people with advanced degrees. So these two issues of lack of diversity and lack of advanced degrees are what has contributed to Japan's inability to create unicorns and new industries. So that's what I believe. So in that sense, universities like APU that are very highly diverse, I think that's highly meaningful, and we have to play a leading role in Japan. And finally, I want to touch on the issue of COVID-19 and give you some of my opinions. So regarding the coronavirus, we are now in an era where we have to coexist with the virus, and we have to think about what to do now, and we also have to think about what to do in the post-coronavirus era. So we have to wait until the vaccine is created. So until then, we are coexisting with the virus. Since we don't have any effective medicine, no vaccines, many people still are staying at home. So we are in what we call the new normal. People are wearing masks everywhere they go, washing their hands regularly, keeping social distance whenever they go out into town. Again, if the virus starts to spread again, we'll be forced to go back to a stay-at-home order. So we'll be going back and forth between stay-at-home requests and until this vaccine or medicine is developed. So that's the basic principle, is that we're going to have to stay at home until this vaccine is created, and that's essentially suspended globalization. However, in the post-coronavirus era, after there is a vaccine, the coronavirus will become much like the regular flu. So it'll become another disease that we learn to live with, and we will no longer need to adhere to these new lifestyle standards. And I believe that the trends of globalization that we were seeing before will return. So in this era now of coexisting with the coronavirus, we're doing things like this Zoom meeting, teleworking, much more than we ever did before. So again, throughout the world, when you look at the IT literacy, media literacy, it's increasing significantly, I believe. So in the post-coronavirus era, we need to take a look at the entire world and take full advantage of this increased IT literacy to improve productivity And I think if we do that, we can create a world that's much easier to live in for everybody. Uh, it'll create a brighter future for us. So now is the time to take advantage of this IT literacy that has been increasing to effectively improve how we live, how we work, and I think that is the best way forward. I've been told by the moderator that I'm over my time limit, so I would like to conclude my presentation having touched on these 3 points. I've touched on the issue of demographics, issues underlying the Japanese economy, so why it's stagnating. And I let you know what my opinions are on the COVID-19 crisis. So I would like to conclude my presentation here, and I look forward to engaging you in the discussion. Thank you all very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, President Degucci, for your presentation. I would now like to hand this over to Dr. Nishimbi for his presentation. Dr. Nishimi, please.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you very much, Deguchi-san, for that a splendid and stellar presentation. It was very captivating and with a lot of insights. Just maybe to pick up on one or two issues that you raised, which I agree with. The primary one being, of course, the issue of gender discrimination. I think that is something that really needs attention, not only in Japan, but globally and even here in Africa. And I like the way you tied it to issues of policy, and in that sense has an impact on population. I also liked the issue that you raised with regard to local government providing services at the local level. I think the local governments, as I'll be saying also towards the end of my presentation, is very vital to coordinating activities at the local level. We really need local governments in that sense. And then also on the issue of approaches to economic management or governance, I really do like the way in which you say that, especially the issue of inflation targeting, and you also raise the issue of what I would call multinational corporations, because when you look at the corporations that you talk about in Japan, actually they have a global reach. So I like to look at them as multinational corporations and their effect, that there's a way in which they minimize the ability of other companies to grow. But here at the Center for the Study of Governance Innovation, especially with regard to the point that you raised about inflation targeting, we have a slightly different view, or we are researching into what we may call alternative economies, where we think that actually the whole way in which the health of an economy is measured through, for example, GDP, is slightly flawed, and that contributes to not really appreciating or understanding what is happening in economies like Japan, which for years has been said to be stagnating. But if you look at other areas of the economy, you find that it is functioning. So maybe that calls for a change in the way we measure the health of the economy, moving away or modifying the gross domestic product as a measure of measuring the health of the economy. And of course, being in an academic institution, I agree with you totally that we really need to promote education, and especially advanced degrees that would also contribute to revitalization. I'll share my screen with you so that I can share my presentation. I wrote out my presentation so that you can follow through, everybody can follow through. So I'll broadly look at global demographic trends and also the implications that they have on labor and regional revitalization. So that basically is the outline of my presentation. Not so much to say in the introduction. Actually, I've already started my introduction, but basically to highlight and also underscore some of the issues that Degucci-san already raised, that the global demographic trends actually are changing the way in which national and international landscapes are operating and the way we live in society. There's also the issue of the increase in urban population. When you compare that to rural populations, you see that the world is trending towards the growth of what are known as mega cities. So you have cities, Deguchi-san mentioned Tokyo, which have populations of over 10 million people also. So these have implications, and one of the or two questions that we really need to look into are, what does this mean for the growth rate and the size of the labor force? Because at the end of the day, really, when we talk about regional revitalization, we are really looking at issues that regard employment, and also therefore what implications does the changes in global demographics have on regional revitalization. So it is very important to understand issues that relate to mortality and fertility, especially if we want to understand the future of the working age population. And there are projections that in the coming years up to 2030, globally, the working age population is going to continue to grow at approximately 20%. And all regions across the world are going to experience a rapid changes in the age distribution. The older population, those who are aged 45 to 64, will grow faster than the younger populations, which include people that are aged 15 to 24. So that has an impact on the composition of the working age population. So if you look at 1950 to 2010, for example, the world had a growth from about 3 billion people to 7 billion people. And then projections by the UN show that by 2030, we're going to have about 8.4 billion people in the world. And by 2050, that is going to increase to 9.7 billion. So this also, in relation to urbanization, it means that by 2030, the world will have about 41 mega cities. Remember, I talked about cities like Tokyo that have over 10 million people. We do have such even in Africa. For example, I can talk about Lagos, which has similar populations and higher. And by 2050, the world cities will also have an increase of about 2.5 billion people. And 90% of these are going to be in Africa and Asia. That's the challenge that we have. But also in Africa, it's slightly different from the situation that you see in Japan, where the population is aging. In Africa, we have a very youthful population. So you will find some economists say that they call it the demographic dividend. And basically, it's something that they say we can harvest and take advantage of in order to develop the African continent. But Africa generally has a very youthful population. We have very many youths, and that's very totally different from other parts of the world. So the rapid demographic changes that we've seen since the 1950s will lead to changes in the size and composition of the working age population. And as I've hinted, developed countries are going to see a decline in the working age population, but developing and least developed countries are going to see an increase. I've given an example of Africa where we have a youthful population, and actually the statistics show that Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, Africa south of the Sahara, adds about 1.1 million people per month to the working age population. And this is likely to increase to 1.6 million people per month between 2025 and 2030. So that's a lot. And it's a lot of headache for policymakers, and it has implications on issues that relate to urbanization, for example. I will touch on some of those issues as we go on, but that figure there basically shows you the estimates. These are world population prospects with regard to population groups and also the growths across continents. And you will see, of course, I did allude to Asia, where you have the age between 25 and 44. You have about 40% there. And when you look at Africa, you have about 60.5% there in that age group. So that's the active group. But then when you look at the other age groups, you see they will be slightly declining. So there are implications that follow these demographics that I've shown. And one of them is the issue of course, environmental degradation. Generally, you will find that where you have people beginning to inhabit areas, and they tend to destroy the environment that they inhabit. So those are negative impacts that you're going to have. Then there's the issue of course, employment challenges that you face. And this is one major headache for governments across Africa, especially. You need to create employment for the youths. You need to engage them. And partly because in certain countries, it is argued in certain academic circles that if you have, for example, there are certain countries that have a preference for boys. So if you have more boys being born, and then you are in a situation where you can't create jobs for them, then the governments tend to recruit them in the military. And that basically leads to instability because neighboring countries become jittery or they become sensitive to what is happening. But also for those countries that experience aging populations, they will tend to be more peaceful because, I mean, the populations are not as active as those that are youthful in terms of what I've talked about. But at the same time, you need more resources to take care of the elderly. So that presents a challenge. I think it's one of the challenges that countries like Japan face. With regards to the impact of demographics on global migration and urbanization, you will find from academic point of view, there are discussions that, for example, disagree with the fact that migration is the same as urbanization. And so urbanization would be viewed as a natural outcome of economic development. But sometimes, of course, cities may grow because of rural-urban migration. I think Degucci-san did also touch on that effect, where young people are moving from the rural areas to the urban areas. We are also witnessing that in Africa. But ultimately, there are many factors that work in various intensities from country to country, which lead to urbanization. For developing countries, the issue of migration or urbanization is one of the most challenging population problems. And there are challenges, for example, that relate to what this means is that you need to provide more social services, for example, especially where you have people moving into urban areas and then populations begin to grow. You have a lot of concentration of people there. You need more social services to provide to those people. But there are also other chances of ethnic groups. In Africa, we have very many ethnicities. And where you bring them together in one space, sometimes you have potential of ethnic conflicts arising from that. So those are some of the pressures that developing countries have to deal with regards to urbanization. And then, of course, there is migration to cities, which is generally believed to affect rural areas, because you leave people that are elderly and do not have enough strength to be productive. And so that has a consequence. But on that, and of course, the issue of just rural degradation in that sense, and that's what we really want to look into, to say, how do we address this challenge? Okay, so you will see that the ratio of urban to rural population continues to rise, and then many urban areas, as I've said, are growing into mega cities. In 2014, there were about 28 mega cities in the world. And as I've said, by 2030, we project that these will be about 41 across the world. And think of that as also in view of the challenges that I've raised. And then the issue of urbanization, rapid population growth, and the youth bulge generally dominate debates on demographics into the future. For example, I've talked about the youth bulge in Africa and the challenges of providing employment, gainful employment for these youths. If you do not attend to that, you have potential of instability. So you will find, for example, that unemployed youths in certain parts of the continent are an easy target for radicalists, people that or groups that are terrorists in nature. So that leads to instability. Okay, then of course there's the issue of conflict over resources, where there are limited resources within areas that have concentrated populations, and the disruption in the provision of services at the local level. So here we're talking about things like provision of housing, even services like water, healthcare, etc., etc. So those are consequences that are faced, especially in urban areas. And if you see an increase in urbanization, therefore, there's a likelihood that these challenges are going to be magnified. But then in terms of fostering innovations, and I think we can go back quickly to history. I won't talk much about these two. They were very controversial policies and approaches to development, but I think they did have some positives. So that even when we talk about revitalization of regional economies, I think history has a bit of lessons for us, because these are some ideas that we practiced before in the past. At least if I look from my African history, we had the former president of Tanzania, Nyerere, who had a program known as, it's basically, it translated from an African philosophy of socialism, but within that philosophy, there was the issue of Ujamaa, where basically he encouraged people to develop local communities in villages, production communities, if you like. And Kenneth Kaunda of Zambia had a similar program under his African philosophy of humanism, where he encouraged populations to go back to the land. Okay, so those are briefly, but they were, of course, I think, implemented at a wrong time, and also they were implemented amidst different and difficult times, but I think there are lessons to be learned from some of those policies that were implemented at the time. But looking into the future, I do agree totally with Degucci-san when he says that when we find a vaccine for COVID-19, of course, there's a president here in Southern Africa who has said that we need to learn to live with COVID-19 the way we live with a disease like malaria. Is something that he says is going to be an endemic illness. And so we just need to cope. But even so, I believe that the trends of globalization are going to pick up speed again after a vaccine is found for COVID-19. So we need to rethink the way we're going to relate with globalization. And again, here, I can go back to lessons of the past 10, 20 years where you try to act local, and then in order to cushion the effects of globalization that are happening at the global level. And then there's an opportunity that is provided by climate change in the sense that this calls for us to rethink the ways in which we produce, the ways in which we manage our economies. And that provides an opportunity, especially for youths that are in rural areas. And here I'm talking about innovations that relate to, for example, the use of solar energies and the use of what we may call the fourth industrial revolution and information technologies. I think this provides us an opportunity to revitalize rural areas and areas that are marginalized and outlining. Some other innovations, I did talk about local government as being an important area that needs to be encouraged, and especially in the sense that it's very important to decentralize the administrative powers from the center or the top, the state to the local areas, and also financial resources to the local authorities. And I do agree, therefore, as I said earlier, with what Degucci-san said with regard to local governments, to say if they can provide, for example, services, but then we bring in universities to say be the link between the local authorities and also the private sector, and people that are working at the grassroots in that sense. But also it's important, I think, to promote localized economies. And here is going beyond your conventional economy. I think we can improve on local supply chains, and the COVID-19 pandemic teaches us good lessons here, where we saw the world was shut down, generally shut down, and we had to rely on local supply chains to provide for people at the local level. If those can be promoted further and enhanced, I think there's a possibility to actually gain speed on the issue of revitalizing local economies. I also promote the issue of informal activities. I think those are very important. And this I also tie up to issues of small and medium enterprises. Those should be encouraged and promoted, and that can actually lead or contribute to revitalization of regional economies. And attached to that is the issue of alternative currencies that you have these mediums of exchange that happen at the local level. But also there are other mediums of exchange and innovations that people at the local level are coming up with, which basically are tied to information technologies. We have, for example, what we use in this part of the world, we call it mobile money. Okay, so people that even have the simplest phones can transact through there are certain platforms that are created for them to transact. And there's an opportunity to promote this, but not only that, they can also be integrated into your conventional financial channels for financial transactions. So basically, those are some of the innovations that I would say need to be promoted, and in order to encourage regional revitalization. At the Center for the Study of Governance Innovation at UP, we are conducting research that speaks to these issues, for example, and we also collaborate with international and local partners. And those are some of the works that we produce in our quest for solutions to the challenges that face these localities. I think I'll stop there, and I'll hand over now to Keith. If there are any issues that are arising on that side, and then we can open it up to a question and answers.
Okay, Dr. Nshimbi, thank you very much. Okay, so we are now ready to open this up to the question and answer. Again, you can enter your questions in English or in Japanese in the Q&A box. You can pull that up by clicking on Q&A at the bottom.
I do see a question for Degucci-san in English, but for the benefit of the interpreter and the Japanese audience, let me just read it out. In terms of fostering partnership between government and private sector, what are your thoughts to make an effective partnership between both, which will lead to revitalization of the local economy in Japan, as we are still facing there's still few local government and companies in regional Japan have the eagerness and ability to go global, and they have not yet utilized the potential of global outreach minded human resources like APU graduates.
APU が具体的にやっていることを
Specifically, I'll talk about what APU is doing in respect to your question. For example, APU is located in the region of Kyushu.
ネーデルランドぐらいの GDP
This has a GDP equivalent of about that of Netherlands. So that would put it at about 25th in the world.
ここには
So in Kyushu,
地方政府があるわけですが
there are several local governments operating.
この地域全体をまとめてやっていこうという動きが
And there's also a trend moving towards trying to
九州の企業は
coordinate this regional government.
経済団体連合会という一つ
So there's the Kyushu Economic Forum that is trying to move forward with these policies.
7人の地方政府の
There are 7 prefectural governance in Kyushu, and there's a governors association, and they meet regularly to discuss how to improve Kyushu. This is where APU is located. So, for example, last year we signed an administrative agreement with the Kyushu Economic Federation that I just mentioned. And so they will be working with their member companies and to send employees to APU for recurrent education. Also, APU has students from 90 countries and regions right now. We also have students from Africa as well. So the companies in Kyushu are not very well learned about the customs and cultures of Africa. So if we can connect our students with these local companies and promote collaboration, then these local companies can get a better understanding of Africa. So again, we have signed agreements with these various organizations with an eye on helping to revitalize the greater Kyushu region. Last month, we
これは日本の九州では
signed an agreement with Kyushu University. This is a national university. It's one number one in Kyushu. APU is number 2. So we have agreed to work with other organizations, our work with Kyushu University to help provide support to students who want to go to work at international organizations like UN or IMF. So that agreement we just signed last month. So APU, we're trying to do many things with an eye on revitalizing, energizing Kyushu and its economy. Now, going forward, I think we can be even more useful to that end. More broadly, we can work with local companies in Kyushu, with local governments, and we want to approach them and tell them, make better use of APU and our resources.
Okay, President Degucci, thank you very much for your answer. And next, we will take a question in Japanese. And the question will be read by Ms. Keiko Arai, a manager with JICA, working normally from South Africa, but currently located in Tokyo. Ms. Arai.
はい、ありがとうございました。ダイバーシティの観点から今後の経済を
So
担う
this is a question
若い
about
人たちに
young
何かアド
people.
バイスがあれば
What advice
お願い
do you
したい
have
と
for
思いま
them
す。こ
uh,
ちら、出口
in
さん
terms of diversity?
先生と両方
How
いただければ幸い
they
です。
what they can do as the future leaders of Japanese economy?
では僕からお答えしますが、ダイバーシティについて
I will start answering the question
やはり
regarding diversity.
頭だけで学ぶんではなく、
This is not something you can just learn about
は
from a
体
book.
で学ぶ
It's something you have to learn about and experience with all 5 senses.
その意味で若い人が
So in that sense,
することは大変意味があると
I think it's very meaningful for young people to study abroad.
APU は
At
6000
APU,
人の学生の中
we have 6,000 students,
西見先生もよくご存知だと思いますが
and I think Dr. Nshimbi is very aware of this.
が
Half of our students
世
are
界各国から来ています。
non-Japanese students from countries all over the world.
キャンパスそれ自体が
Our campus
小さな
is
地球である
the embodiment of diversity. It is a microcosm of the world. I call it a UN of the young.
ですから
So
留学に似た環境
we have
地球の縮図の中で
this microcosm of the world where young people in Japan can come and experience something like study abroad without leaving Japan. They can experience diversity. They can meet people from all over the world. And if you visit countries outside of Japan, you're going to learn that what is common sense in Japan is not common sense elsewhere.
頭だけで学ぶので
Again, when you're learning diversity,
頭だけで学ぶの
you cannot just learn it from a classroom or from a textbook. As I said before, you have to learn it with all 5 senses, with your full body.
ました。
Thank you very much.
西見先生の方からはありますでしょ
So,
うか
Dr. Nishimbi, do you have a reply?
Yes, I think I'll just echo Degucci-san's sentiment with regards to training, and that I think within the area of training in a university environment, it provides an opportunity for not only acquiring skills that are necessary to be able to engage in work that would promote regional revitalization, but also it's universities generally tend to be melting pots where you have people from different cultures, people from different countries. And that if you have a global outlook, I think it provides, you build a team of people that go out into the world to influence the world, having interacted with various people in their institution. I think that would be my comment. But also maybe let me just take advantage of this time you've given me to, there's one or two questions that relate to developing countries and the issue of aging population. As I said in my presentation, ours in Africa is not a challenge of aging population, but a challenge of a youthful population. So the question for us is, how do you provide opportunities for these young people to be very productive and to develop the continent and also their respective countries? The African continent is at a unique time where it has agreed to come up with an African Continental Free Trade Area. And this will be the largest regional grouping in the world when it is implemented early next year. But then I think the benefits of such a continental global agreement should filter or trickle down to the young people. And again, I think for us as educators, this is a very great opportunity to train young people to be able to seize the opportunity to engage in trade, to engage in production that will fit into these opportunity that the continent is doing. There was also a question on the age gap between people who are young and the leadership in Africa. For me as a political economist, I think the challenge still remains, and again, it will fall back on us educators. But I think there's a need again to keep on training young people. I think if you talk about the age gap between people that are leading and the ones that are young, it's a question of really mentoring young people to become leaders for tomorrow. And part of that role, I think, will be played by educators like us at universities, but also would encourage the political leaders themselves to groom young people for taking up political positions. I'll hand over to you, Jerry, if there are any questions in Japanese there.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nshimbi. Because Dr. Nishimi took another question in English, Ms. Arai, do you have another question in Japanese?
はい。それでは出口先生。
Yes, so Degucci-san, it is said that there is a set average wage set for all the prefectures in Japan, but it is now decided by each prefecture. But it is said that if it is done unilaterally all through Japan, the Tokyo wouldn't be concentrated into that. And there is another question to Dr. Nishimbi, that is there such kind of average wage system in Africa or not? Well, Arai Sensei, thank you very much for question. In terms of the minimum average wage, it is actually related to the reflection of the regional productivity itself in reality. So, the Tokyo is actually concentrated on many things, but the correlation between that concentration and the average minimum wage of each prefecture are not correlating each other very much, I assume, but rather all throughout Japan, there is the impact of declining population in Japan that's far much larger in the economic impact throughout Japan. However, in another words, Tokyo has a lot of concentration, only one, but that's not the issue. The population increases. However, but the younger generation just goes to Tokyo. That is the biggest problem. as Dr. Nshimbi mentioned, it is important that we have to train the young people because young people will lead the world in the future. Looking at globally, at the end of this century, African population and Asian population will be equal, it is said. So Africa is a great heartland, so that which actually will lead the world in the future. However, for the sake of doing that, it is important to educate the young people. It is essential. So in APU, we are planning the APU 2030 vision, what is called a challenge design. So one of the title among the APU 2030 vision is invite more African students and learn in APU, so that like Dr. Nishimbi or the Martin-san, so including we can just send those students back into the home country starting from Africa. So not APU is not revitalizing the Kyushu in Japan, but we want to contribute to Africa as well. So we are making a lot of challenges. We are determined to do so. So please send the prospective young people in Africa to APU so that we deliberately train those people. Thank you. What is being mentioned and related to that comment in APU or in the University of Pretoria, these are the university of very much diversified, but not about the higher education like university, but in the case of the elementary school or the junior high school, in the obligation, compulsory education, what kind of diversity we can get in Japan? In the case of APU, Degucci is speaking, now there is a trend to change education in Japan. So the high school, we have a collaboration of 30 high schools in Japan, which collaborate with APU, so that we are asking those high school students to have a collaboration with APU to have a look of the APU, which is a sort of the small size reflecting the reality of Japan. About Kyushu Island, APU is located in Oita Prefecture, and with all the local communities in prefecture, we have agreement so that we have in annual that we are inviting the kids from schools like elementary school or junior high school with 12,000 like kids. So that we get those students to get accustomed to the world atmosphere. So the elementary school or junior high school of Kyushu and the high school of all through Japan, we'd like them to use APU more. Those young kids can get accustomed to the multicultural environment. That's what I think so. Thank you very much. That's about APU. So APU is inviting junior high school or the high school kids. So you are inviting those students. So Dr. Nshimbi, what about in University of Pretoria? Is there any such initiative in it?
Yes, at the University of Pretoria, I think what I can say is that first of all, we have a school or a department within the university that is dedicated to training educators that go to teach in elementary and high school. So we provide a degree in that sense, and in that sense, we provide a platform for reaching out to the younger scholars. But we also provide opportunities annually for younger scholars to come and interact with the university. So we have what we call open days in South Africa. So we invite these younger scholars and we take them on tours on our campuses so that we can interact with them, academics interact with them, and also students in the university interact with them, basically to just orient them towards university life, and also to motivate and inspire them to work towards acquiring higher education. I'll also maybe answer, I think there was a question that was posed to me in Japanese with regard to average wage in Africa. A number of African countries are moving towards that. In South Africa, for example, in 2018, an act of parliament was passed on what is known as the minimum wage. So we have a number of other African countries that are doing the same. So we have a national minimum wage that is by law passed and is supposed to be paid out to workers and even to domestic workers. We do have that. I think the challenge again with regard to employment relates to the big companies. And I think it's also one of the impacts of globalization, where they have a tendency to casualize labor. So they do not take people on permanent employment, but they treat them as casual labor. And as I said in my presentation, this is one of the areas in which I'm very interested in researching because it leads people to work in the informal economy. But at the end of the day, you find that the government does not have policies that deal or address with issues that relate to the informal economy, because the policies are only targeted towards formalized companies and your multinational corporation. There is also a question to me about the youthful population and the challenge of employment and rural-urban migration, and how governments across the continent achieve a balance between that. I think I would speak in terms of solutions, and just to re-emphasize what I said earlier, to say we have an opportunity with developments in information technologies. And remember, when we talk about the youthful population and the tendency to move to urban areas, their main concern really is finding employment. So if you can provide for employment or encourage them in terms of the opportunities that they see even in rural areas, you encourage and promote those activities, I think that would also encourage regional revitalization. So in this respect, with regards to information technologies, you will find that youths nowadays, we have a number of names for them here in Africa. We call them Generation Z, Generation X, or something like that. But they are tech savvy. They like telecommunications and information and telecommunications. So we can take advantage of the fourth industrial revolution. And in areas like agriculture, for example, we talk about things like smart agriculture, where you use new information technologies to conduct agriculture. Youths are very interested in that, and that can attract them to work the land. But there are other areas, in localized areas, apart from agriculture, in which youths can engage. Issues like, for example, tourism in the local areas. But if we integrate these new innovations in technology, that would be very attractive to the young people and would to encourage them to work in their localized areas and develop those areas. Thank you, Keith. Sorry, Jerry, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you very much, Dr. Nshimbi. Do we have another question from the moderators? Okay, I do see one here for Dr. Nshimbi. Dr. Nishimi, thank you for having your deep insight into Africa. My question is, what African countries, especially sub-Saharan African countries, need or expect to get from the Japanese government, such as JICA or Japanese companies? Is there potential for Japanese companies local companies in Oita to go to South Africa, etc.?
I think for this, my response will start with APU itself to say I'm an alumni, and thank you very much for training me. But being at University of Pretoria also, I think our arms are open for APU to send students to come, especially those that are doing research that is focused on Africa. We are available. And here I'm talking about maybe Japanese students who would like to carry out field work in Africa. We are available to host them at the University of Pretoria, for example, and then provide links with them to field work in the African continent in that sense. But then coming to your question, I'm not sure if I really quite remember your question, Jerry. If you could just state it again. It was about, JICA. JICA is already working at UP, University of Pretoria. We have, for example, in the Center for Japanese Studies, we have Mr. Martin Manganye, who is also an alumni of APU, who works with JICA. At the university. But beyond that, JICA is active in South Africa, in Africa in general, especially in areas that have to do with infrastructure development, for example. I'm very aware, at least in one of my areas of research, which is development corridors and transport infrastructure that relate to trade. JICA is very active in promoting those activities. Our Vice Chancellor, in his speech, talked about TICAD, that's the Tokyo Conference for International Development, and it's through that Japan is actively engaged in Africa through, among others, JICA to promote development and cooperation with African countries. So that's the way I see it, and opportunities do exist, of course, for young scholars to be able to interact with these organizations. Over to you, Jerry.
Okay, Dr. Nishimi, thank you very much. It looks like we are coming up towards the end of our time. So if I could, I would like to just maybe a brief, very brief comment, if I can, from President Degucci and then Dr. Nshimbi before we wrap this up. President Degucci, if you have a brief closing comment.
今日はですね、プレトリア大学、それから JICA の皆さんのおかげで、こういうミーティングができたことをとても嬉しく思います。僕が述べたように、APU はもっともっと九州を元気にしたい、日本を元気にしたい、同様にアフリカのお役に立ちたいと、こう考えています。ですから、今日のミーティングを機会に、これまでもいろいろプレトリア大学にはお世話になっていますが、西見先生もいらっしゃるわけですから、プレトリア大学との関係をもっともっと深くし、JICA の皆さんのお力も借りて、我々はもっとたくさんのアフリカの若者を教育したい。
I would like to strengthen our relationship with Africa with the University of Pretoria. Sorry, my mic was muted. So I look forward to working with Martin, with Dr. Nshimbi, and especially people like you who are alumni of APU who are working hard in Africa. We want to keep working with you to become even more useful for Africa. So I don't think there's anything more happy for me as the president of APU to be working with alumni like you. Thank you all very much for today's meeting.
Okay, thank you very much, President Degucci. Now, Dr. Nishimbi, if we can have a comment from you.
Thank you very much, Jerry. Thank you very much to everyone for putting this together. It's been a time well spent and meaningfully spent. I think we need to have more of such engagements, but go beyond that to even have exchanges of students and research and work that is meant to make the world a better place. On behalf of the Vice Chancellor of the University of Pretoria, Professor Kupe, on behalf of the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities, in which my center is based, Professor Vasu Reddy, on behalf of the Head of the Department of Political Sciences, Professor Skuman, which is linked with the Center for the Study of Governance Innovation, which I direct. I would like to thank everyone for being part of this. Deguchi-san, Ontoni arigato gozaimashita, and everybody else, thank you so much for putting this up together.
Okay, so that brings to an end our first webinar with the University of Pretoria and APU. Thank you very much to JICA for your support and your assistance. I'm sure we will have many more of these in the future, and so I hope that all of you can join us in the future. I apologize to those who we could not answer their questions, but I hope you will join us again in the future so you can ask questions again in the future. At the end of the webinar, there will be a survey that you may see pop up or maybe emailed to you. We certainly ask for your cooperation in completing the survey and providing us more information so we can help you with future webinars. Thank you very much. Have a good evening or day, depending on your place on the globe. From Ritsumeikan Asia Pacific University here in Beppu, my name is Jerry, and I thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jerry.